Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David.
Hello, Taylor.
Hey, David. Hey, Rhonda.
Hey, Taylor. And we're joined by Taylor's 2.5-year-old son, Ilan, who's sitting on her lap while we're doing this recording, which is so sweet.
How do you spell Yvonne?
Ethan.
Ethan.
I'm sorry.
Yes, Yvonne didn't sound right. Ethan, yes.
Ethan.
We're joined by Ethan.
Ethan.
Yeah. Alana's my oldest son. He is not joining us, hopefully.
But if he does, that would be fun too.
I'm sure he will at some point.
Well, we thought we would do a little follow-up on our tremendously popular podcast with you, Taylor, just on a week ago today. I guess on April 3rd. It won't probably be exactly a week from the first podcast, but yesterday that one was published. Yesterday was the 9th.
Correct.
On 9th of April, and it was a midweek podcast that we didn't send out announced at all, and it got a huge following right away. And the photo you sent was so beautiful, and I was just so proud of you, and it's always so much fun seeing you and working with you. But we thought it might be nice just to have a little love story, Corona love story part 2 follow-up, because some very unexpected things have happened since we first interviewed you. And we'd like to catch up on that. And then Rhonda's got some great questions just about your love affair and your marriage and the man you were afraid you might lose and talked about in such a beautiful and loving way.
Yeah, Taylor, I thought it'd be really fun for you to tell us how you met Gregg and a little bit about your love story.
Sure.
How you've been together and...
Yeah, absolutely. I will do that as I'm trying to keep Ethan quiet with large amounts of lollipops, which is our way of surviving these days.
Let's start with our update, because when we last spoke, you were pretty much in a panic that I might lose my husband. He might get the coronavirus. And then something, he was working in the ER, and 2 or 3 of his close colleagues have been intubated in ICU, where they've caught the coronavirus, and it was looking pretty frightening. And the thought that we didn't necessarily reduce the belief in terribly far was, I might lose my husband. Mm-hmm. And that went from 100 to 50, but it was still fairly elevated, and your anger too was fairly elevated, although all of the rest of your emotions had improved dramatically. And it was such a heartwarming and touching and human experience to be with you last time. Tell us about the new developments.
Yeah, David. So, and Rhonda, the new development is that my worst fear, or what I thought was my worst fear, came true. Gregg did get COVID. We found out, now it's been a week. And that kind of fear and terror has totally gone away, or probably to like 5%. There's always the fear of the unknown a tiny bit, but we kind of faced the worst of it, and luckily it seems that he has a fairly mild case. So obviously it could have been much worse, but we were lucky enough that I didn't have to wait. That's kind of a positive reframe on him getting COVID, is I didn't have to wait many weeks to kind of face the worst fears, and it's here, and we're living through it, and he's doing okay. He was really, he has bouts where he feels terrified still and afraid that it could get worse, but luckily he's doing pretty okay. And ironically, I think we're luckier than a lot of people, but kind of feel like now that he has it, he will be okay. And now he has immunity to it, so he can go back to work without us fearing that he will get sick and die of this, which was our worst case scenario. And also, hopefully in 2 weeks, once his quarantine period is over, he could actually come home and help out a little bit. Obviously, he'll be working around the clock, but that will also alleviate some of the burden that has been placed on me to care for our kids alone. I think over the last month, I've been without any childcare, without a husband, and trying to see my patients during the kids' naps and at night. So what we did fear the worst has come true and hasn't been as bad as we thought.
That's awesome. I have just one comment, one question.
Sure.
I'll make my comment first. When I was in clinical practice, I had about 4 patients. Well, I had many patients who were terrified of going bankrupt, but most of them, it was just very much of a fantasy fear
Right.
type of thing, because they were doing really well, like attorneys and stuff like that. But
Right.
there were maybe 3, 4, 5 who had shaky businesses,
Sure.
and they were afraid of going bankrupt and thought, my wife will leave me and my friends will reject me. I'll end up homeless. And these fears were very intense. And 4 of them did go bankrupt while I was treating them. Their worst fear came true. And in every case, their depression and anxiety completely disappeared at that time. And although it seems like a paradox, it's not if you think about cognitive therapy, that only distorted thoughts can upset you. The truth is not the cause of our suffering. Things that happen in reality, it's the distorted perception of it. And the reason their negative feelings disappeared is because what they feared, they realized then for certainty, was just a bunch of rubbish. It wasn't true that they didn't have food to eat. It wasn't true that their families rejected them. And in a way, it was relief, because they had faced their worst fear and they learned the devil has no teeth. And that was so. It was not a surprise to me that you were in such an intense panic, and then when the worst thing happened, he did get the coronavirus, and then your fears, you realized that you had had a lot of distorted thoughts. And then once you no longer believe those thoughts, the fears disappeared. So it's just kind of a technical point, but I think it's philosophically amazingly interesting. And from a practical point of view, I'm just so thrilled and happy for you. I just love you to death. And Gregg too, although I don't know him as well. I've always been extremely fond of him, and I'm so happy for you and for Gregg and the kids. It's just a great joy. And I know all of those listeners who loved you and from the first podcast, they're just going to be so grateful too. And I predict probably get some really nice emails, and Ethan is happy too. And one other thing is that Gregg is volunteering to work in spite of his illness. Is that right?
I think we'll call that voluntold. That's what happens to me a lot at my kids' schools, contributing to the parent association and different jobs like that. You're kind of told that you will do it, and then you comply. So
yeah. But that's amazing that he's out there on the front line saving people's lives and giving to people, even though he himself has been struck down and struggling. That's just amazing to me.
Yeah, I was, obviously want him to come home and be with us, but it just reminds me of a conversation that we had once he was done grappling with the fact that he had COVID. Was his thought like, hey, I should work extra so my colleagues that don't have it don't have to work and risk their lives because he would have the immunity to it. And there was probably 90% of me that was like, you're amazing, you're a hero, like that's so selfless. And 10% of me that was like, but we need you, come home and help us, right? And kind of
was there a little
finding
anger around that
balance.
too?
Totally, yeah.
That
Like
was the
he really,
anger that we had last time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I still think that's something I will continue to grapple with this entire time. Like I'm so proud of Gregg and admire his work, and he's doing tons of research and trying to write papers and really find the best way to treat these patients. It's so admirable, and not just to help patients, but help coworkers that are in difficult situations. And then there's that anger that's also like, hey, like I have a practice and I want to support my patients, and we have kids together and I want help with that. So it's a fine line. I think since the diagnosis, and I'm a planner, so like knowing that there could be a plan in place. Oh, there's Ethan saying hi. Since I know there's sort of a plan in place, it makes it easier for me to dial down that anger, because I feel as though I'll get a little bit of help and then also have the certainty that he's safe.
Well, Rhonda's got some great questions for you, and then I know you want to share with us some tips from your perception, from your experience as an expert working with families and children who are distressed, and how you managed to keep it together as a mother, as well as your role as a head of the Feeling Good Institute in New York, and a brilliant therapist. So Rhonda, take it away.
I just think it's so exciting to that he'll be able to come home in 14 days and you can get some help, but also the kids will be able to like really enjoy their father. They haven't seen him for a month, did you say in the beginning?
Yeah, so yeah, it's been about a month since we saw them. I'm gonna answer Ethan for 1 second. Yes, sweetheart. Okay. So the extent that the kids have seen him, we went on one walk together and sort of saw him from 6 feet away. And now from time to time, friends and family drop off food at our apartment. So he comes over in a mask and we leave it outside the door. And yesterday we kind of opened the door up a crack and everyone was able to say hi to him. He had a mask on and gloves on. So it's kind of our new normal, and we texted afterwards and he was saying how great it was to see everyone, but how he wishes he could just come inside and be back to life as usual. So yeah, it's been about a month since we've touched him, right? Or had a normal interaction with him, but we've seen his face a ton over FaceTime, and my oldest son loves to do Zoom meetings with him. We have a lot of distance learning through school. So Gregg, when he has some free time, will hop on the computer and do some school lessons with Alon. But
that's neat.
That's a long-winded answer to say that, yeah, it's been about a month since we've seen him face to face.
Well, tell us how you guys met and a little bit about your relationship.
Sure. We met in 2008. Yes, Ethan. So sorry for that interruption. We met in 2008. We met on an online dating website before apps became the way to go, called JDate. We had a very memorable first date in that I had been on 3 other dates that weekend. One to a very loud concert where I lost my voice and couldn't speak by the time it was supposed to be our date on Sunday. But I had propositioned Gregg to go to Central Park and play Frisbee because I was bored of all the other dates of like coffee or wine. So I texted him and I said, just as a heads up, I have no voice, but if you still want to play Frisbee, I'm happy to go play Frisbee. So he thought to himself, I've already blocked off the day and I really like to play Frisbee, and her voice probably couldn't really be all that bad. And so he was living in Queens and I was living in Manhattan. It was during my first year of graduate school and his first year of residency. And he met me outside my apartment to realize that I really literally had no voice. I could muster up a little whisper. And so we decided we would just go play Frisbee. And the rest is history. We had like a 4 or 5 hour date. I guess through body language or expressions, we connected, we walked and just enjoyed being around each other, but really talked very little. And then we met, 2 or 3 times a week around our busy work schedules.
Wow, that's so sweet. How long did you date before you got married?
We got married in 2012. So that was, I guess, it was almost 4 years. He had accepted a fellowship at Stanford for critical care medicine. And I told him I would only talk about going to California if we were engaged. So we quickly got engaged because he wanted to talk about moving to California together. And I think the funny part of that conversation is when I was in grad school, and I think David probably remembers this from our early conversations in California, that my program was very psychodynamically oriented. And we did a whole lot of talk therapy. And Gregg and I never fought, but the one thing we fought about was he had a medical model and wanted to know what I was going to do to help my patients feel less depressed and less anxious, and what tools I was going to give him. And I would tell him, it doesn't matter if you know what to do, if you don't understand why you're depressed or anxious. And that even if you have those tools, it's important to keep talking about why you're anxious. And kind of to humor him, but really to further my training and find something different, I decided that when I moved to California with him, I wanted to get the best cognitive behavioral therapy training to prove to him that it wasn't all that it's cracked out to be.
Oh,
Well, that's so cool.
Funny.
That's why I went into it at first too, to prove that it couldn't work, that it was a lot of baloney.
Yeah. And so I found 2 wonderful team mentors and David's group at Stanford, and was determined to prove to Gregg that CBT wasn't all it was cracked out to be. And that's one of the only fights I've ever lost with Gregg, because CBT is all it's cracked out to be, all it's cracked up to be. And I no longer know anything about psychodynamic therapy, but hopefully a lot about cognitive behavioral therapy.
I'm sure it's still in there.
It's still, no, I'm just kidding. It is still in there. And I definitely do use it at times to support patients in certain ways that they need help. But fell in love with David's work and approach, and since then have been on TEAM-CBT since then. And that, so in 2012, after we got married, we moved out to California, and that's where I fell in love with TEAM-CBT and David and the whole crew in California. And that's where Gregg did his ICU fellowship at Stanford. And then we had our first child out in California. And then when he was about 6 months old, moved back to New York City, where our family and friends are. Left lots of great family and friends in California. And that's where we are today, living in New York City with our 3 kiddos and director of the Feeling Good Institute.
That's
What
a really
kind of
great
services
story.
are you offering there for our listeners? Is there training if there are New York therapists who want to get training in TEAM-CBT?
Great question, David. Yeah, we do both in-person and online training in TEAM-CBT. We offer both individual therapy as well as low-fee therapy. And we also provide video therapy and intensive therapy, which has been a really new and exciting program. I know FGI in California has a very strong intensive program, but we've really loved starting that program here in New York City, where patients come in from all different places or even locally to do large amounts of therapy over a short period of time to bring about rapid symptom relief.
What's been your experience with that?
Oh, it's been remarkable. I mean, what we could accomplish in a week's time, is sometimes more than we could accomplish in years of therapy or in months of therapy. So totally grateful to you, David, for pushing these longer sessions and more intense therapy, because it's changed people's lives. It's really been amazing. And we have a great staff of therapists here to provide that. And meet patients' needs.
Yeah, I'm much more, maybe it can't be this way 100% of the time, but really feeling like therapy is a procedure we do all at once, not some long drawn out thing that goes on for months or years and years, but that, we're looking for measurable change and symptoms like depression or anxiety or improvements in intimacy and relationship satisfaction, and bringing about these changes as fast as possible. And I've found personally that if I can sit down with someone for 2 hours or sometimes an hour and a half, sometimes 2.5 hours, you can get, most of the therapy completed in that one chunk of time. And then you may need some time fine tuning. Yeah, fine tuning after that. Maybe work on another problem, overcome the depression, and then maybe would want more sessions to work on a marital conflict or a relationship conflict. But that for the most part, we can get the job done. Get the job done quickly. I see we've got other competitors in the room, and I love the sounds from Ethan. How old is he now?
Ethan is 2.5
Two
and
and a
full
half.
of energy and a new language explosion. So it's been a blessing to kind of be at home with him, sort of silver lining of coronavirus and getting quarantined is to get locked up with these 3 cute children who have so much personality and life that I often miss when I'm working. So
Yeah, it's
definitely
it's
been
really some precious times.
it
Yeah.
is.
So,
It's
Taylor,
definitely
you
been
were hoping that,
challenging at definitely been challenging at times, but definitely really wonderful to have them here.
I think that's kind of a segue into, you said you weren't an expert on it, but you could talk about your own experience of the day-to-day life of taking care of 3 young kids all under the age. You have 3 kids under the age of 6. You're feeding
Yeah.
them 3 meals a day and doing
Oh,
everything
yeah.
to take care of them. We were just wondering if you could describe some of the experience that you've had and what works for you. And it's really interesting.
Yeah, I'd say I'm totally not an expert in how to handle kids during COVID at home, because I think as an expert, it requires years and years of experience, and I only have four weeks or so. But I think it's something that we're all in together. So would love to share some of the things that are working well and the things that I'm trying, and maybe some of the things that aren't working as well. But I think families are all put in this new role of whether that means trying to work from home and educate children or care for them or take care of their emotional needs. And the way I've been thinking about it is trying to find a balance between what my kids need every day, which is something different, kind of meeting them where they're at with their emotional experiences of this. I think my daughter is someone that's quieter but thinks a lot, so she definitely has a lot of sadness about dad not being here. And my oldest son definitely lets out all his thoughts, so we know how he's feeling about it. And Ethan is just happy little baby over here. But really kind of checking in with your kids each day, getting a sense of how they're feeling. I think it's hard for people also that really want like a structure to their day, and where it's hard for them to be flexible. So something that I've tried that's worked really well is every night before I go to bed, no matter how tired I am, I try to write out what everyone has the next day. So whether my youngest son has different speech therapy and different things like that. So making sure we write down what appointments they each have, when my oldest son has to log into his classes, when my daughter has her classes. A lot of their extracurricular activities that were canceled are offering video sessions. So just kind of keeping track of what options are there, and then going into it the next day with a flexible mindset, sort of finding a combination between some activities are optional and we offer it to them, and others, we tune in and they get out of it what they want. That doesn't mean that I'm forcing it on them. I think as time goes by, I'm trying to push them a little bit more, but we started with really low expectations. Like, today, here are the 4 classes, and we're turning them on, and I don't even care if you go anywhere near the screen. And over time, kind of pushing them to where I feel they're able to, which doesn't mean that every day I force my son to watch every second of his school, but kind of meeting them gradually where they're at, and then when possible, pushing them a little bit further. And one of the things that I'm focusing most on now, which is also important for my mental health, is working on independent play. And I know with technology that's something a lot of kids really struggle with these days. So something that we've tried is for each child, we see how much independent play they can do each day and set a timer. And that basically means, like, for my oldest, who's 6, I'm happy with 20 minutes. So we try for 20 minutes of him playing alone in his room. And then we do something that feels really fun or exciting for him, whether that means FaceTiming with family or he really is into music. So kind of finding something to help them learn how to play more independently. And for example, my youngest it's just something he's learning right now. So for him, independent play means me sitting behind him and helping him stay on task with, this morning we did putting stickers onto paper and trying to do that for a certain period of time. And then we kind of keep track of how much they do each day, just to let them see how they're progressing over time. So I think that's been a fun activity for us to do. And at first they're like, we don't want to do it. We want to do whatever we want to do. And we want to hang on mommy all day long. And I quickly realized that wasn't going to work for any of them. So I think it's important to think for your family, like, what are small manageable goals each day that you feel like you can work towards and be successful with, right? Like, it doesn't mean if your kid has no idea to read that you need to teach them how to read by the end of Corona break or whatever you want to deem it in your family, but finding small things that you could feel like you're successful with each day.
Well,
Little
that's really
steps
cool.
for big feats.
Yeah, exactly, David.
Yeah.
So Taylor, you talked about doing 4 things, just to summarize, that every day you talk to your kids about how they're feeling. Mm-hmm. And you have a structure, even though it's a relaxed structure, you provide some structure and planning for them to look forward to. And you're helping them develop more independent play and giving them rewards after they've had some independent play. And that's different for each age of your children. And then you're helping to, you're meeting and helping them meet small manageable goals that they can be and you can be successful with. Yep. I love how you said you talk to your kids about their feelings, and they're so, your kids, you're 6 and 4. I was
6, 6, 4, and 2.
Right. And Ethan, who's 2. How do you teach kids to talk about their feelings? I'm thinking maybe people don't really know what that's about.
Yeah, I teach a lot of TEAM-CBT therapy classes to how to amend these methods with children. And the 5 secrets of effective communication work really well for kids as well. If one of my kids is throwing a tantrum, I might say, gosh, it seems like you're feeling really angry and upset, and that makes a lot of sense. And I'm feeling a little confused because I really want to know why. And it's confusing to me right now,
And that's helpful to them?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it helps them kind of share what they're feeling. And even this morning, my daughter was like, because you're so mean. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm so mean. And I had no idea why I was mean, but it was because I shut off a show while a credit was going on, and she likes to watch it till the credits are done, right? And that was very, very upsetting. And so seeing the world through her eyes, like, it didn't make sense for me to just say to her, I think a lot of times in parenting, my initial reaction used to be, the show is over, the credits are playing, what's the big deal? But instead I was like, you're absolutely right, the credits were still going and you really wanted to see that. And so she went, yeah, I wanted to see it. And then she walked off and was fine, right? And so sometimes it feels like, how can I disarm a tiny little terror that's 4 years old and is crying because I shut it off in the middle of the credits instead of at the end of the credits, right? But just kind of disarming that and letting her know that I heard her and got it and loved her was really enough to diffuse the conflict.
I love what you're saying right now. It's so cool. It's so awesome.
Yeah.
Another thing that you said I love all the things that you're saying. Another thing I really liked was this idea of independent play. I at some point when I was learning cognitive therapy, got over my fear of being alone, because like so many people in our culture, I always thought that somehow inferior if you're alone. Right. You have to be around other people to feel loved and happy and fulfilled. And then I discovered that's not necessarily true. And so, and I'm sure we made tons of mistakes with our children, and would still do so if we had more children, because I'm kind of a slow learner. But one thing is, we always thought it was fine for our kids to be doing things alone, that it's fine to be alone.
Yeah.
And then they grow up without this idea that somehow it's terrible to be alone, and they always have to be around people to feel happy and fulfilled. I think that's such a neat thing. And if your children pick up from you, yeah, it can be great to be alone, and you can really do wonderful, fun things, and it can be great too to hang out with us and with each other and with your friends.
Absolutely.
Then they just naturally assume that that's the way it is. Oh, here's another country heard from.
We're being joined by my other children who would love the television.
Hello
there.
Look at your beautiful daughter.
They're on the table out there.
That's Elon.
This is Elon over here. Elon, you want to say hi?
Hi.
Hi.
You might be talking to a lot of people.
Do you want your mommy back now?
Can I keep talking?
No.
You said no.
I just need you for 1 second.
You just need me for 1 second? Okay.
Turn on the TV.
Okay. I'm going to tend to him for 1 second as a huge
Okay, well, maybe that's our end point.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Taylor.
Let's end on a high. Yeah.
Let's end on a high.
Thanks for having you. Yep. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.